Okay, I believe I heard the predictable critique of the implication of naturalist morality in that it ultimately seems to become relativistic. You can either choose to accept selfishness, a selfish morality in terms of, like, oh, I can do whatever I want because it doesn't matter. It gives you a blank slate. Or you can accept a more a morality that's more in agreement with the goals of society and the people around you, and more in the interest of peace. I both reject and resent this characterization of naturalism, or that if naturalism can tell us something about morality, it ultimately tells us that relativism is true, that ethical relativism is true. I find it to be just the opposite, and I find that in the notion that often follows, or almost, I don't know, necessarily follows a belief in God, is the notion of that the acceptance that a belief in God is improvable, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a matter of faith. And this is where I think the trouble with religious morality comes in. When you have faith positioned as a virtue in and of itself, that is, that it is good, it makes you a good person to hold on to a belief in spite of the evidence, in spite of evidence against it or for it, just because faith in and of itself, that is, holding a belief, whether true or false, regardless of evidence, is virtuous in itself. This, to me, opens the door to moral relativism, much more than just saying, oh, morality is based on, you know, just pragmatic utilitarian considerations as a result of natural selection and evolution. This puts the power of our moral decisions, or what we ultimately choose to do, in the position of manipulation by the authorities that represent, or who represent this belief in faith in a virtue of itself. So the authorities of religion can basically use this almost ultimate moral principle that faith is a virtue in itself to justify anything. Because if it's God's will, and God exists necessarily, and I know this because I have faith, and faith is a virtue in itself, if it's God's will that I kill Dustin right now, then I'm perfectly justified in doing so. If God, if I have a personal relationship with God, or my priest, or the Pope himself came to me, he's like, Dustin, you gotta get rid of that guy, Dustin. I can seemingly justify that because it's a matter of my faith, that I believe that God not only exists, but he talks to me, and that there are certain figures that have some kind of megaphone to God, and they can communicate this, and I can know just through my intuitions, through my faith, that something is justified or unjustified. And I think you've seen this time and time again with religious institutions using the notion of faith, or the notion of salvation, or fear of damnation and punishment, although Dustin rightly rejects the belief that I, as a non-believer, am destined to eternal torment, which I thank you. That's very courteous of you. But the vast majority of people who do seem to accept a theistic belief, a monotheistic belief, which I think is what we're talking about here, given the context of our culture and where we are. Most people who have a monotheistic belief are part of the great tradition of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the great three. They do have some conception of punishment for unbelievers, or the idea of the incentive for keeping faith as a virtue in itself, or continuing to believe in God and following God's commandments, is the idea that there might be some kind of consequence to not doing so, which is basically how our morality works anyway. But our morality, our moral intuitions, that this would be a good thing because it has positive consequences, or has the right balance between positive and negative consequences. We do that anyway, and in terms of rewards and punishments, we frame it that way as well. But we don't, in our moral decisions, we don't often cite any authority but our intuitions, that this is right, or that we know it's right or know it's wrong, or it feels right, it feels wrong. But with religion and faith as a virtue in itself, you have an authority you're citing. You're citing an authority beyond above all authorities of itself, and that for that reason you can justify anything because that authority trumps all other considerations. So that's why I think that the charge against me that naturalism or an atheistic worldview leads to a relativistic morality is misleading, and I would actually assert the same charge to a theistic worldview. I think it's ultimately results in, or can, and has resulted in moral relativism and the ends justifying the means, which is something you probably would accuse me of with my naturalistic tendencies and the so-called, well, I think this is a good point to bring up. In all fairness, Dustin did not make this, did not point out this consideration, but it's often been asserted that the great atrocities of the 20th centuries have been committed primarily by unbelievers or governments, atheistic governments. And the common examples given are Stalin and Hitler. Now, I've always found this a frustrating charge because, first of all, neither communism or fascism under Hitler and Stalin, respectively, has atheism as a tenet of its goals and ends. Yes, the communism in its form in Soviet Russia did reject a belief in God, a belief in a Christian God, but it just replaced it with a belief in another God in and of itself, that being Stalin or the state. That's what was the end result of that. And as for Hitler, well, Hitler wasn't even an atheist per se. I mean, he never renounced Roman Catholicism. Yes, 5 minutes. And it's just, and even if it is true that these atrocities were committed where atheism just happened to be associated with it, it had to be like it was a policy, or there were many unbelievers, or it was unnecessary to the statement. It doesn't mean that anyone in this group committed these acts on behalf of atheism or as a result of atheism. There's no one going around waving the atheist flag and saying, let's kill people in the name of atheism, let's kill everyone. But you have seen that countless times with God. It's like, in the name of God, let's kill everyone. But I defy you to give me an example of anyone waving the atheist flags and justifying mass murder on the belief, on a non-belief or a rejection of a belief. So yeah.